Hey everybody, welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Wade Acuff, and I'm going to be your host for this spotlight with Ryan Summers, Spillt Senior Creative Director. Ryan, what's up? How's it going?
Dude, Wade, I'm so excited. I think I probably watched way too many of your I think Behance live streams, yeah, like taking tips on drawing. So I'm
Oh,
excited just to be
first,
here.
first, I'm sorry, but also thank you. Uh, but yeah, we are going to dive into everything Ryan wants to talk about today because this is his spotlight. But first, I want to say hello to chat. What's up, chat? How's it going? We are, of course, on Behance and on YouTube. If you have any questions, please just drop
Hmm.
them in the chat. We'll try to get to them as we can. And if you want to stay, kind of clued in to what we're doing here on Adobe Live, make sure you like, subscribe, do all the stuff and button pushing you're supposed to do that. But enough of that. But get your questions in. We'll take a look at chat. Ryan, what are we gonna do today? What do you want to walk through?
I don't know, man. Like it's been I think almost 25 years working in some form of animation or motion design. So you kind of catch a few things. But I was talking before about I've gotten really lucky to work with a lot of directors I love, a lot of properties I love. But maybe my favorite movie of all time, favorite character of all time,
Oh,
is the Iron Giant. And
oh,
I got to work on a project with Iron Giant, actually like storyboarding and animating and designing them. So maybe that's a good one to go through.
oh yeah, 100%. I'm a big Iron Giant fan, so absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of gotten a little bit of a resurgence. But just to set the stage, I've worked for a long time, done a lot of different stuff. But a previous job I was at for a company called Digital Kitchen, we got a call because there's somebody building a hotel. They didn't tell us what it was going to be, but they're like, "Hey, you guys did something for a hotel in Vegas, and you had some screens, these columns that were very similar." And they asked us like, "Could you just tell us what screens you guys used?" And I have this like trick. It's like turned into a superpower where I'm always like, but what about if I ask you something else? Or like, why not? So I asked him like, could we just take you to the hotel in Vegas and talk about like your project? And what it turned into was Warner Brothers was building a hotel next to their only theme park in Abu Dhabi. Like it's this huge, you can imagine, in the middle of the
Yeah.
desert, and all indoor. It's like three shopping malls bolted together. It's like half superheroes and half Looney Tunes. And it wasn't open at the time, but they decided that they wanted to build a theme park. And if you look at this picture, this is the lobby of the hotel, but literally through those doors is the theme park, like roller coasters, crazy
Oh
Batman
wow.
ride that's like Harry Potter. But when they showed us, they're like, well, like we went to Vegas, we showed them this hotel we had worked on before, and they were like, so what do you think of our plans? And basically at the time, they really kind of were just sticking like bronze statues of Looney Tunes characters in the
Mhm.
front of the hotel, and that was it. There was no like Warner Brothers. It was just like
Yeah.
a very like traditional hotel. And we're like, man, if you want to take this to like the next level, like we got to like infuse it with tons and tons and tons of Warner Brothers stuff. So that's what we did. Like it was funny, man. It was like a job that was going to be like 2 weeks and it turned into over 3 years. And
Oh
it
wow.
honestly,
How much of a sell was that? I mean, or did they just jump right onto it?
it took, well, you know what's funny about that is like it kind of like it was a head scratcher because we showed him this other hotel in Vegas and we're like, like if you're competing with in Vegas, like a like Las Vegas Strip hotel, you have to create like a world and a story and like a reason to pick because I think there's more hotels on one street than there are anywhere else in the world, right? So you gotta have to have a reason. So we kind of crafted this whole like Alice in Wonderland story. And I'm like, you guys need something just like that. Like, I don't know if you've ever been lucky enough to like go to the lot for Warner Brothers, like the
Mhm.
actual like sound stages. And you walk through that place and it's over 100 years and it's just like history. Like everything you could possibly be in love with in entertainment, something came from that backlot, right? Like whether it was like superhero films, comic books, cartoons, the Termite Terrace back from the Looney Tunes days. There's like thousands of films that you don't realize were built there, but they literally were built and made in like there. And they have the cool thing about the Warner Brothers lot is that like there's still pieces left over. Like I'll show you this. I got really lucky. I basically pitched them like, you know what, could we take stuff from your movies and bring them to the hotel? And they're like what? I'm like, well, how about you just let me like do you guys
Let
have
me look.
warehouses? Can I just see? And it was like it's again, this is like the superpower. If you're anybody's here listening, like just asking for permission sometimes is like kind of the superpower for anyone. And I was just like, what do you guys have? And like, we don't know. I'm like, well, can you show me where they're at? And they're like, we'll have to like blindfold you and take you to our warehouses.
Yeah.
And that turned into like 6 months of like literally going through these Home Depot sized
Oh my
warehouses with
gosh.
crates and they literally like it's impossible to catalog. They don't know what they have. But we would literally be like cracking up crates and be like, oh, I think that might be Batman's cape and cowl from the Michael Keaton movie, or like
Wait,
those.
wait. I have to stop you. So you were unguided. You were just like they were like, here's a crowbar, here's some crates, knock yourself out.
I will say I had adult supervision. I wouldn't say
Oh,
that it
okay.
was like
Okay.
security guards and I wasn't like locked in and just got to do whatever I want.
Well,
But
I'm gonna imagine it the other way. So go on.
yeah. I mean, it wasn't too far off. It was me and the one woman who kind of runs it, who's just like a
Okay.
master at like making all this stuff happen. But it was mind-boggling, like what we went through, and it really like infused the spirit of like why they would even do this. Once
Mhm.
we presented, I think we did like 2 or 3 workshops in LA, and we kind of explained to them what the possibilities could be. And it was a lot of it was just like teaching them what they already have, but they just didn't know. Or it's like,
Oh, wow.
like they had this
Yeah.
really cool, I'll share this. Like they had this really cool spiral staircase, but they weren't doing anything with it. It was just like architecture. And I was like, why don't we turn that into like the coolest version of like your guys' warehouses, where people as they walk up, they could see something on the
Yeah.
outside, but walk up and get like not touching it, but getting
Yeah.
like as close as you could to it. And I feel like when they heard that, they were like, awesome. So what else can we do? And then it was like 3 years of just like pitching and making, like I think we pitched 1,100 pages of concepts over the course of like a year, and
Wow.
it went bonkers, man. Like it's I could just show you some of these, right? Like, like
Yeah.
the check-in was this like super widescreen kind of all it was all granite, but then like the screen itself was made to look like granite, and it's basically like this never-ending infinite pan of like all the properties and the characters, like all the superheroes, all the filmmakers, like like Warner Brothers at the time was like that's where directors go to direct for their whole life, like Christopher Nolan, Clint Eastwood. Um, so we were just kind of like unlocking like the vault of what like Warner Brothers was, but we went crazy, man. Like we designed the restaurants, came up with the names, like pulled all the photos, made the menus, made the outfits that the people wear. Like this is called the Directors Club. But we even like I think there's another one here somewhere. Um,
So did you bring in you're talking about designing for
mhm.
or creating the menus, did you bring in chefs and like other
We
like how did
consulted
that
with
work?
them. Yeah. Like so at our team, the great thing about Digital Kitchen is that there's a lot of in-house people with really wide specialties. So
Mhm.
we had some designers who spent a lot of time doing branding for, like every company you could think of. And we basically treated them like that. Like, what if this was a world-class like Michelin star restaurant? How would
Oh,
you approach
okay.
it? But then we'd bring in, the big thing with them is that any studio or a company that big, there's so many people who have to decide if you can or can't do
Right.
something.
Right.
It's really rare to get the chance to get, I don't think people realize this, like when you go to Warner Brothers or other companies, it's almost like being like talent agency where each character almost has their own like rep. Like if you're an
Okay.
actor,
Yeah.
you work at an agency and you have your rep, like Tweety Bird has their own
Yeah.
rep, like even
Someone
Scooby-Doo.
responsible for that brand that yeah.
And they're
That's
always trying to elevate it, right? They're always like, let's get a new show made. Let's get them in a theme park. So you can imagine there's like a lot of people you have to talk to even be like that picture of Clint Eastwood had to be vetted 10 times this Sunday to be like, nope, that's the one, right? So that's part of the reason why it took 3 years. But the other reason was we made, I think it was 92 minutes of brand new bespoke animation, live action, everything you could think of for these very weird screens, right? Like this is the lobby, and
mhm.
there's 3 columns, and each column has like wraparounds on each end, and then the screens are mirrored on the other side of the lobby. So you literally get these really unique, really weird kind of, spaces. So you couldn't just take like a poster
Yeah.
or some animation that was made for, 640 by 480 in the 70s. But what it meant was we got to make these really cool things. Like I really wanted to do something Ocean's 11, and for whatever reason, we couldn't. So I pitched them like, well, what if Tom and Jerry was actually Ocean's 11? And they didn't know what I meant, but like we have these 3 columns, right? And I could just play a little bit of it while we're talking.
Oh,
So
please.
basically this is 3 or 4 or 5 different camera views of the same scene, right? Like Tom is sleeping, Jerry's trying to get a piece of cheese, and you see it in different places, but it's all being hand animated traditionally as if it was like 3D, as if there were like real security cameras. So you can see the cat with the fork in his mouth, but then you see it happening here. But at some point he might run up to camera really close to another one of these. And like we're in the mouse hole right here. So at some point later on, the mouse, like he runs into the mouse
Wow.
hole. Like, it's all these shifting canvases. So we had this really cool ability to kind of like make things that could only be made for these really weird screens. And there are like 5 or 6 different ones.
Oh, that's
Um,
amazing.
it was dope though. Like at the time Space Jam 2 was being made, and we are actually able to like tap on the shoulder of artists who have been like animating Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny like for 40 years and get them to do this like super cool little moment. Like this goes on those screens and it's Bugs and Daffy playing horse,
Mm.
but each of them are on different sides of the lobby. So they'll actually like throw the ball across the screen. And it's
Oh,
almost like you have to stand offside and like see,
right.
what's he throwing? And if you pan to the right, you'll see Bugs catch it. And then they'll kind of like go back and forth against each other. So it was really like taking this weird thing, like these weird screens, and actually making them in a way where it's like the only place you'll ever see anything like this is at this hotel, which is super cool.
That's awesome. What you were talking about tapping the shoulders of these animators. So what kind of team are we talking about here? Like, 'cause this sounds like the scope is just wild.
Yeah, it was pretty wild, right? Like, so I mean, I can show you like it's almost impossible to show you the actual decks themselves because, like I said, it was like I would say like I think it was like 11 or 1200 pages of like, what if we did this?
Yeah.
Or what if we did that? So one screen that we did have was outside of the hotel. It's 6 stories tall. We convinced them to put a 6 story tall LED screen on the outside, as if it's like the billboard for people driving or flying by. You'd see it. Um, but they're like, that's cool. Why would we do that? I'm like, well, why wouldn't you? You have a
Yeah.
6 story tall robot. That's one of the best characters of all time. And they literally are like, what do you mean? I'm like, Iron Giant. Let's make the only place in the world where you can actually walk up to the Iron Giant the same size he would be in real life. And then when you sell them on that, they're like, cool. What's that going to be? So you're like, initially, I think I had a very small team of 12 artists that were storyboard artists, concept designers, viz dev people from literally like
Mhm.
all over the world. Like I had people in Australia, people in Japan, people in South America. And this is pre-COVID. This is a few years ago. So it was like
Yeah.
kind of a novel thing to literally like go like time zone by time zone by time zone over the course of a day. Now, I mean, I feel like that's what everybody does. But
Yeah.
basically what we would do is we had this great storyboard artist named Ian Slack who can mimic pretty much literally any movie style. And he's extremely good at likenesses for people,
Mhm.
but also apparently Iron Giant. And we just basically said, like, if you have a 6 story screen, what do? You sell the scale, right? So, have the camera pan down from the Warner Brothers logo. This only shows at night as well. So we have like these rule sets about what can happen. And he goes and he grabs the power lines and it kind of like shakes him, but then he slams down face first to camera to really sell the scale. Like if you're a little kid and you're standing in front of this, it feels like you're looking up at this giant guy, but then he falls down in front of you. There's a time lapse moment. He wakes up, he sees the deer, and then he kind of rockets off, right? So there's like this is 4 pages. There's like 1,096 other pages like this of potential ideas that we did for about a year and a half. But the team was, I think, at its biggest. The pre-production kind of like development team was 12 people, including me. And like I was going in, and I think there's another one here. Like these are my boards. Like I was going in and literally like storyboarding, like what
Yep.
can we do with Looney Tunes? Like, oh, let's actually put them in and like recreate something, but make it totally new and totally bespoke, right? Like the old
Yeah.
like there's a Daffy Duck cartoon where like they actually show the pencil and like redrawing different things. Like, what if we did that, but we did that with Looney Tunes? Um, so all that stuff gets built. It turns into, like we can play this while we're talking, but like over time, like then that's when it gets handed off to production teams. So that's when I think I had five or six different teams that had different specialties. Some were straight up 2D animation, right? Some were hybrid, some were just 3D. Sometimes we'd hire just like a single individual artist that just had a really cool look. They were like,
Mhm.
what if we did Lord of the Rings, but in this person's style? Um, and yeah, and then you kind of play a telephone operator. Like it's just a year and a half of
Yeah.
production after that. So yeah, it was
Well,
bonkers. It was a
it
cool
looks
job.
amazing. So when it was all said and done, did you go and get to visit and take a walk
Man,
through or?
I will say if anybody on this call has ever been to or ever gets to go to Abu Dhabi, take some pictures and send them to me because that is the one that's the rub on this job. I did get to go out while they were building it. Like like way ahead of time, but I've never seen it actually installed. I mean,
Mhm.
I'll say it was cool because they were building the theme park at the same time. And that's about the rarest opportunity you can ever get is to walk like the ride system of like
Yeah.
while they're building rock structures and putting in animatronics. So I got to do that. That was pretty cool. But man, yeah, it'd be a really special day to actually walk into a place that you never have, but you basically had it
You've
sitting in your
seen it?
brain
Yeah,
for three
exactly.
years, right?
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it got so granular. Like it got down to the point where I was actually going through. I don't know if I have any pictures of it, but I was actually going through and like hand picking stuff. Like we found these really dope Mars attacks Like
Yeah.
those, that's a real like like model they made for like on set for lighting reference. But
Hmm.
it even got to down here like this. There is a little bit of Ocean's 11. This is George Clooney's like arrest warrant picture like from Ocean's 11. But I went through and picked every photograph and hand selected like this room will have these three pictures because it's part of a theme.
Yeah.
Um, I even snuck in. I don't know if you remember The Shining, but
Oh,
the carpet
yeah.
pattern.
Oh,
We
familiar.
I don't know if anybody at the time at Warner Brothers knew that's what I was suggesting, but it is there and it is on the I think the third floor. Like it's just like the film itself. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's fascinating.
one day I'll get there.
Yeah,
Maybe when I
absolutely.
retire, I'll go check it out. It'll be a nice long flight.
That's great. Um, well, I saw some of your drawing skills there.
Oof.
You were
I
doing the
mean,
storyboards. So talk to us. I mean, designing a major, designing for a major hotel is great,
mhm.
but let's talk about your drawing. This,
I
I mean, I looked through. I just kind of went through your Instagram.
mhm.
Um, I don't know. Talk us through a little bit of how you got started, or how what your goals. I mean, were you an artist first, or did you come to it later, or what's the
It's a
deal?
weird, I don't know what your journey was like, but it was a weird way to get there, right? Like I always drew during school. I love comic books. Like this is a good example of like stuff I like to do outside of any kind of like constraints of like an IP or whatever. But I drew comic books, right? Like I used to love doing, I think when I was in junior high and high school, you make like zines, like you go to like a place to
Yeah, yeah.
photocopy and staple them, right? Which is so weird to say now because everybody makes web comics and like there's a million ways to get your stuff out. But I never thought that there was a way to do that for a living. I was like, oh, this is a fun like hobby. And
Mhm.
it's so weird now because I feel like it's so like common to be able to like if you like video games, if you like comics, if you like movies, animation, like there's a million places you can go to learn, right? Like Adobe, Behance, Live. Like
Yeah.
there's almost too much and you can be paralyzed by where to go and what to learn. Or who to follow. But back then, I actually went to school for chemical engineering of all things because I
Okay. Okay.
never knew it was possible. But this is dating myself, but it was like 3 or 4 years around the time of like Jurassic Park, Nightmare Before Christmas, Toy Story, all the DreamWorks movies. They were all starting to hit, and like I just happened to get really lucky. I was drawing one day in a computer lab, and the guy who was running the lab, not even a teacher, was like, "You should take my class over summer break." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, there's this thing called 3D Studio." And he's like, basically for 12 weeks, we got locked into the computer lab on a weekend. He gave us a key to like go in. We closed the door and we just like taught ourselves 3D Studio. It
Uh,
was before it was even like, this is how old it was. It was like DOS. It wasn't even like Windows. It was like a long time ago.
yeah.
But yeah, and then I happened to be lucky in Chicago. Like I found a school that was not too expensive and I did 2 years there, somehow transferred out of chemical engineering into animation. And then it was like away we went. I got a job doing character animation for about a year and a half back
That's cool.
in Chicago. VeggieTales was a really big deal if you
Oh
remember
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I didn't work on that, but I had the guy who hired me had like a contract with the company that was doing VeggieTales.
Oh, okay.
So that's where it just stuck. That's where it got my blood. Like animation is just like everything. And then I did some video and worked in some video games for a few years. And surprisingly, that's where I actually met a bunch of ex Disney 2D animators.
Hmm.
And I kind of got like a master class in like 2D animation from these older animators who didn't know any 3D. I was teaching them like After Effects
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah.
3D. And then my trade was if I show up early, I'll teach you that. But at lunch, you guys teach me, literally hand cell animation, like flipping
Oh,
stuff.
that's great. Yeah.
And all those old tricks. So it was kind of a great master's degree. But the whole time I was just into comic books. And then I moved to LA, started doing motion design, started doing title sequences for a while. And then I moved back to Chicago to work at Digital Kitchen, which is where that like those kind of bigger like experiential things, um,
Yeah.
kind of like it's weird, right? Like motion design is this thing that no one in the industry knows how to explain to people. No one outside of the industry knows what it is, but it's basically anything creative fits
Yeah.
inside motion
Yeah.
design, which makes it cool.
I think that does get lost a lot of times when you're trying to, explain to someone what motion design is. It can be pretty all encompassing. It's
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I want to stick to your drawing for just a second.
Mhm.
So during all of this, during all the transitions, did you always keep a sketchbook?
Oh my God.
So you're a sketchbook guy. Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I probably have embarrassing sketchbooks from way too long ago. Then render. Yeah. I feel like
Well,
the sketchbook. I don't know how you feel, but I had for a long time. I would buy a sketchbook and I would draw about 10 to 15 pages in it, and I'd start off strong. And then there'd be like a page where it was like all garbage. And I would get really embarrassed because you'd see everybody post on Instagram or on blogs or wherever, and you're like, this stuff is hot garbage. And I would literally like rip that page out, close the sketchbook, put it on the shelf. But then like a month later, I'd get the itch and I'd be like, I can't open that book. So I'd go and buy another sketchbook. And I just have these stacks of like, and
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that happen to you at all? Or did
Yeah,
that
I
happen to
definitely
you?
went through
Like,
that phase of
yeah.
like, this isn't good enough. I'm gonna be out, and then I had already had a problem with buying sketchbooks when I didn't need them. So it was
Hmm.
like, oh,
Yeah.
here's another sketchbook. Eventually, I think I got over that where I was like, sketchbooks are supposed to be garbage. They
Yeah.
are supposed to be just you working through stuff and figuring it out.
Hmm.
But it is hard sometimes with, seeing everybody else post these perfect
Oh my
sketchbooks and stuff.
God.
That has nothing to do with you. That has nothing to
Yeah.
do with your growth. It took a while to figure that out. But I think that's just part of the landscape now. You kind of have to just, it may take a while for you to come to that, not you, but just in general,
Anybody.
to come to that, yeah, that kind of resolution. Like, oh, I can be terrible. No one has to see this.
You actually
Uh,
should be terrible.
I
Like this is the
agree.
thing I explain to people all the time is like the moment I actually figured out is like I would buy really nice like moleskin notebooks.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
remember I got a gift of like really crappy sketchbooks, but they were like big and they weren't hardcover. The
Yeah.
paper was like almost see-through. And I remember I was on a long, I very specifically remember I was on a long train ride, and I all I had with me was a Sharpie, and I was trying to design a character like for something for the studio I was at, like a little explainer video, but I wanted to do something that didn't look like normal explainer video characters. So I was
Yeah.
just using a Sharpie, just doing shapes. And then because the pages were see-through, I could just roll the page over to the next one and then like almost like an animator, like do a refined
Yeah.
version and then another one. And I remember it was like a 2 or 3 hour train ride. I might have been going to Comic-Con or something. I
Mhm.
remember by the end of the train ride, I had filled up the entire sketchbook, and I had never done that in my life because I didn't care about anyone seeing it. I was
Yeah.
super loose. I was with a clumsy pencil, like, like the
Mhm.
big fat thick Sharpies are clumsy with them. There's not a lot of accuracy.
Yeah.
But I was like, I just learned so much and I filled up this thing, and I may never show it to anybody, but I can probably find 5 or 6 pages that I'm like, I can use this. I can literally build
Yeah.
off of it. And ever since then, man, like it's something clicked in my head where it's like, I need to be doing this every day or as much as humanly possible.
Yeah. I did that for a while. You were talking about, I was looking around. I usually have a sketchbook within, reach,
Yeah.
but for a while I was like, oh, let me buy this really cool looking
Oh,
sketchbook. And then I didn't want to touch it because I didn't want anything to be wrong with it. And then I realized I was filling up these cheaper ones. And I was like, all right, I'm done with all of that. I don't care if people see, but that's a great story about
yeah.
like just practicing and getting it all out. I would actually challenge people to, like you were talking about making it. When I get to drawing, and this is just one of those things. Um, Try the things you never try. That's what
Yeah.
the sketchbook is for. That's like if you're really good at faces or you're really good at whatever, that's
Hmm.
cool. You're not gonna get bad at it if you don't do that. But if you try something you haven't done, you're gonna grow a little bit. And
Yeah. You'll
sketchbooks are a perfect place for that.
man, I think sometimes people I totally understand the whole like aversion to sports ball and like
Mhm.
sports analogies, but I really do challenge people all the time that, to a certain degree, artists and athletes are somewhat similar in the sense that they have to always work out. They always have to be like
Mhm.
maintaining their practice
Mhm.
or their like muscle memory. But they also, I feel like a lesson artists can learn from athletes is the sense that like there's very rarely failure, right? There's always the next round. But if you don't start, if you don't work out, if you don't take swings, you don't analyze them, you don't have somebody come with you to look at what it is you're
Yeah.
doing, you could draw 10,000 drawings, but if no one was there to tell you what you're doing wrong, there's probably another 10,000 more that are going to have just like maybe the smallest incremental upgrade. But if you're always doing it and you figure out what things resonate with you and you have somebody looking and considering it, you might be able to do 1,000 drawings and have a
Yeah.
huge, but if you're not taking the at bats, right? Like I don't know if you're a baseball fan at all or not, but like it's always blown me away that the difference between like the Hall of Fame best player ever
Mhm.
and somebody who can make $20 million a year and somebody who would never play in the majors is the difference between being able to hit one more pitch out of every 10 than the previous person. Right? Like a
Yeah.
200 batter versus 300 batter is like, well, you're a professional who's going to have a very good life. And the difference between a 300 and a 400 batter is being able to hit one more pitch out of 10, and it never has happened in the entire history of the sport. Right? Like the
Yeah.
difference between being a never having drawn to a hobbyist to being a pro is somewhat similar to that same like arc.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And sports analogies aren't lost on me. So I'm totally with you on that. Um, this was we were talking about doing this big project,
Mhm.
and we can go into it a little bit more, but since we were talking about sketchbooks, I always have to ask, do you still find time? Obviously, I see your Instagram, but how do you, and do you still find time to get to that sketchbook? Because
Yeah.
that can be really tough when you're, trying to manage all this stuff.
Yeah, you know what's weird is I feel like as there are more tools, like I just saw Adobe Fresco is free
Oh
and
yeah.
available to anybody,
That's right.
right?
It's
Like
free, everybody.
huge, right? And in case, yeah,
Everything.
I'll do,
Yeah.
there's my little bit of Adobe promo for you.
There you go.
But whatever it might be, like whether you have a phone or you have a tablet or you have a field notes book, right? Like I feel like everything is available to you. Like inspiration is widely available, the instruction is widely available, the examples are there, the surfaces, the ways to share it, the ability to create like an audience and make money from it. All that stuff is there. And I think it all it does a lot of times is it serves to create like more and more imposter syndrome and more where you're like, "Oh, what's the purpose of doing this drawing? It's not going to be anywhere near as good. Or like, oh man, the distance I'm going to have to go from here to something I feel comfortable with, it's gonna be impossible. Um, I feel like the best way to always be drawing, A, is just like use whatever tool you have with you that you can carry with you. Like I have this thing, I don't know where it's at. I have a thing called a sketch wallet, and it's literally just like a leather wallet, and
Yeah.
you just stick like a little field notes in it, and you can put like a little golf, like miniature golf, like pencil in it.
All right.
Like again, a dumb object that like barely works at all, but it stays sharp. It's very small. It has an eraser. I keep it with me all the time, but I think the number one driving factor, there's I guess two things, is having people call them accountability groups, but like I basically call it like a burn friend, like somebody who you can check in with every week who's gonna like give you a hassle if you don't have anything to show them,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
then you can do the same thing back. And then but I think the number one thing is having a project, like whatever it might be, like drawing or writing or learning how to do this and like talk. If you have a goal with a project that you can actually like always be judging against, that's the way that like the way you supercharge everything. Like I don't know how much you can see this board back behind me, but I'm starting to do a like a daily journal comic because
Oh, nice.
I love comic books, right? I love
Mhm.
they're like the smallest atomic unit of something you could own and develop and share and create an audience and tell stories and learn more about yourself and be practicing. Like it's a real thing, right? It's so easy to do. Um, and you could be like literally like old school like newspaper strips, like 4 panels. Like how do I tell a story in 4 panels and draw something? Um, but it's easy to turn that project into something that's like gigantic. Like the speed that your project goes from 4 panels to Lord of the Rings almost always is like ridiculous. Like how fast
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
you make an epic and then you never get anything done because you're like, I got to figure out the story and the world and the character. But just like 4 panels, just talking about something you did in your day, but drawing it and figuring out how to write it. I find that has been kind of like fuel for me to try to like get better because you can
But do
go
you,
to it.
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But do you block out time for that? I mean, how does your
Yeah,
day,
I try to.
okay,
Let's,
okay.
like,
Well,
you know,
we always have to try.
yeah, but I mean, but you have to give yourself like a specific time. Like, so what I do is in the morning, my kid goes super early to school, so I get him to school by like 7:30, 7:40 if we're cutting it close. And then when I come home, I try to like make a cup of coffee and I give myself an hour and I literally have a timer, just like a little circle magnet timer that I
Yeah.
hit hour. And I do half an hour of going through Behance looking for inspiration that I catalog and the world we live in with motion design, like, you could get a crazy assignment at any moment and you have to be ready
Right.
for it. So I'll spend a half an hour doing that, and I'll spend a half an hour working on this project, like these daily comic strips, and I'll try to write 5 or 6 ahead of time, like literally write them out. Like this is what the first square is going to say. This
Mhm.
is what the second one, and then it becomes a project, and then you have. So basically, I always try to live in systems and routines. So like the system is I want to create a certain amount of 4 panel strips a month. Then the routine is I'm going to get myself excited by drinking some coffee and looking at some cool stuff. But then the second half hour is cool. Now that I've been filled up and fueled, what
Yeah.
do I do? I try to like at least draw, again, it's the atomic principle of like the small scene. If I can draw 1 panel today, even just 1 panel, that's one more than I had yesterday. And it gives me a place to start the next day. I'm not starting from zero. So yeah, I don't know if that helps, but that for me, that's what I've
Yeah.
been doing the last like 6 months. And it's been weird to see it actually working because it normally doesn't, but
Well, let's
that's
say
how I
six
approach it.
months is a large amount of time. Like for you
Yeah.
to be consistent, that's already a win, I would think.
Hmm.
Um, well, is there another project, like, do you want to talk about how you got into Spillt and
Yeah.
some
Thanks
other
for
things?
asking that.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good example of like how if you love a lot of weird stuff and you slowly start like practicing, building up your like muscle memory and the things you dig. This is we got asked to do an intro at Spillt for the Eric Andre show on Adult Swim. I don't know if anybody's
Yeah,
familiar with it,
familiar.
but they were basically like make something and at the end stick the logo on it. I was like, cool, anything? And they're like anything. So I'm like, okay, I've wanted to do more character animation. That's in my history. And I want to do something weird and something that's fun. And Spilt hasn't done a ton of like 3D character work. We do a lot of 2D, which I love. But I had this little character that I was trying to figure out like, okay, what can I do? I can do something cartoony. I don't have to do cloth sims, so I'll just like have a character who's just wearing like a shrunk down t-shirt that's like a
Yeah.
texture. So yeah, so basically like over the course of I think it was 2 months, we were supposed to do 15 seconds and like I was saying, like everything turns into Lord of the Rings. It turned into like a 30-second piece,
Right.
same, hand like I think we had 3 or 4 people on the team. But in the spirit of like trying to learn new stuff, did this, started doing storyboards. Um, in the course of a couple of days, modeled a character based off the drawings and like the turnaround.
Mhm.
But then I convinced our boss to invest in a motion capture suit. So I'm not going to show you ever video of me wearing a motion capture
All
suit.
right, internet, you heard it. Go
You'll
find
never
it.
get it. You'll never get it. But I don't know if you can see this, but like it's pretty amazing with technology as it's come along. And you can even do this now. This is about a year ago. You can do this now with markerless motion
Oh,
capture where you don't have to wear a suit and you can literally just have a phone or 2 phones and it can analyze and then apply that to a skeleton that gets applied to your character. Um, Now, I'm a proponent of animation, right? Like hand drawn animation and then keying that animation. But I think there's something about motion design as an industry that like encourages like this Wild West approach of trying 20 different programs or tools
yeah.
and use them ways they never expect. And what's really cool is using a motion capture suit and a little bit of tools to kind of clean it up and then bring it into a 3D program, you can get this base of animation that it's on a cartoony character, but it has weight and it actually has like physicality that is really it's very time consuming as an animator to get to the point where you can even do that,
Oh yeah.
but then also like apply more like cartoony stuff on top. So this is actually the first motion capture I ever did in a suit. If I did it now, it'd probably be a lot better. But it's applied to the character. You can see all the problems, right? Like the hands are cutting through. But what's great about that is it doesn't take much to then go and keyframe on top of that, like
Yeah.
reduce keyframes that give it that I always call things textured timing, but that like almost Spider-Verse feel where things aren't just moving smoothly all the time.
Hmm.
And you can animate on top of that, but then you can get this really broad cartoony like feel really really quickly, right? Like I started off as a character animator and I remember we used to be responsible for I think it was like 5 seconds a day, which was fast, but when you're just keyframing it's really hard to hit that. And I think I
Yeah.
did over the course of like the weekend that I had the motion capture suit, I think I did the rough mocap and cleanup in like 3 days for 30 seconds of animation, which is kind
Wow.
of like
Yeah.
and like and then you start getting a
Amazing.
little bit more I guess ambitious. So I'm like, well, what if I have multiple characters? So like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'll have 2 different characters, and they're starting to get a little bit more sophisticated. And then I have a great 3D animator named David Rickles at Spilts that I was like, could you make a cheese monster for me? Like a monster literally made out of cheese. And he's like, I don't know what that means, but I'll come back in 2 days and see what I can do. And then you start trying to combine stuff, right? So this shot is pretty cool because it is completely hand-keyed animation with this weird monster. This starts off as mocap, and then when the tentacle is not in the shot, but there's like a cheese tentacle that grabs him. When it grabs
Hmm.
him, pulls him, all the mocap is turned off, and it's handed off to hand keyframed animation. Um, and you'll see the actual shot, but like that's from here on out, it's just hand-keyed animation. But it all speaks really well
Wow.
to each
Yeah.
other. And this shot was probably done in half a day, right? Just to get it to where it needed to go. And then we start designing some backgrounds, and then what you end up with is it's 30 seconds, so I'll just let it play out.
Sure.
Um, but it's something like this, where could it be even better rendered? Could it have even better animation? Absolutely. But for like a 3-person team over the course of a very short amount of time, the tools today are kind of mind blowing for like how much you can do with like a guy wearing a very awkward mocap suit and 2 other people, trying to make something. So yeah, so and that's kind of like I did all these boards myself to like kind of show again, same thing like what I was showing before, like Photoshop. Yeah, and it was great. It was received really well. We're designing another one day. Hopefully, we'll have enough
Oh,
time to
nice.
actually make another one and like almost create a small series of these vignettes
Yeah.
that tells a bigger story. But yeah, it all comes out of that love of like animation, comic books, storyboarding, film, TV.
Yeah. So you said you got some others like this on
Um,
the way,
yeah,
upcoming,
I started designing them, and I feel like we designed it to be 15 seconds and it turned to 30. And I was like, well, the 30 seconds, you start storyboarding and doing this stuff. You're like, well, what else could we do?
right?
So you have a whole bunch of other things. So I have ideas for like another two or three. I can't promise anything, but we'll see. At some point,
Sure.
hopefully, we'll be able to sit down and do it. And honestly, like I was saying, the technology has gotten so much better that like it would be fun to give everybody like this like markerless mocap app on their iPhones and let them go and record animation and then apply it, to the character and do the kind of plussing of the animation on top of it,
Mhm.
and see where you could go. Like I mean, I probably have a wish list on my board somewhere of like, I'd love to do, better particle effects. The stuff you can do now with like real
Yeah,
cameras and track them in After Effects to get real handheld camera moves. Cloth sims, like I don't know how you feel, but I'm sure everybody watching this, like you can get overwhelmed so fast by just like the pace of new tools. Like even Adobe Max was what was it, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks
yeah,
ago?
yeah,
The amount of new stuff that's either coming or is about to come out, again, it can be almost paralysis where you're like, what do I do
yeah,
next? Where do I go? Like,
yeah. And it is one of those things where you have to try to keep up at the same time as you're still using old techniques, which I think is it's kind of that like if you have the an experience of you learning something, obviously you're going to have to keep learning new things, but
mhm,
you don't lose the old stuff.
yeah,
You're able to apply it, which I think is kind of allows us sometimes to approach new tools with a lot of history, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
So
sometimes I feel like that's a superpower, right? Like,
yeah,
it can feel like, I don't know how many people are listening to this have been in the industry for more than like 5 or 6 years or I don't know, 10, 15,
we
20.
have a whole range. We have a whole range. Yeah.
It can feel overwhelming, right? Because you work for so long in one tool and you're like, I figured it out. This is what you do. And then a year goes by and you're like, now there's 10 more. And how do I use them? But it's that stuff under the hood, under the
Yeah.
surface,
Yeah.
like the principles and all the fundamentals of whatever it might be, right? Like design, animation, color, just your observational skills of seeing things, like that stuff are the things that let you figure out what you want to do with the tool. And then, like how to use just the right part of it. Like I think so many people get caught up in like, before they ever make anything, having to know the entire tool in and out.
Yeah.
And that's
I
just
think
freezes people.
absolutely. I think even if it's like you're just starting something, you're like, I want to animate this thing. Well, you may not know how to animate yet, but if you already know how to draw, you can scribble it out, you can get started.
Mhm.
What are you showing us right now? Because we're talking about fundamentals, and it looks like we have a little animation happening.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is one of those things that you're asking, like, how do you keep going or do personal projects? I wish I would have. I took a photo of these two like gorillas. It was kind of this end frame was kind of based on it. It's like these two little infant gorillas playing and pushing each other, and I was
Hmm.
like, man, I wonder how I can animate something like that because I always, if I have free time, I always want to do cell animation. And this is all like Photoshop, right? It's like we said, there's Fresco, there's tons of great tools. There's some very expensive tools out there for doing 2D animation, but I love the fact that I've been using Photoshop for 20, 25 years, however long. And I didn't realize for a long time you could just do straight on cell animation. And there's a couple additional kind of like, add-ons you can get. There's a really great tool called Time Lord that
Hmm.
lets you take stuff and send it over to After Effects. There's some Animators Toolbar Pro and Anim Color. Just give you a couple little extra things. But like for the most part, these are Photoshop layers. It's your Photoshop brushes, and you're just frame by framing back and forth, right? You can onion skin. And yeah, like I just was like, man, I really want to just like do more traditional hand animation, but not with, I used to have it back there, but used to have like an animator's disc and flipping paper, which is great, but it just feels so slow and
Yeah.
slow. So and not even that it's archaic, but like it feels like if you ever try to do it, it feels like there's secrets in the paper as you're flipping. You're like, I just don't know what the secrets are,
Yeah.
right? Like you have to, but when you're in here, you can just literally like learn so much faster just being able to like unskin and frame back and forth. But then if you've ever used After Effects, it's not that hard to then go into After Effects and take it like the next level and create a background and start doing
Wow.
stuff where
Yeah.
like there's really cool stuff you can do with like making the environment interact and react to it, or you can create like God rays to give it some kind of like sense of the environment and whatever. Like there's all these tricks in here for adding edge lighting and doing coloring and this is very rudimentary, right? Like I'm not a pro cell animator by any stretch, but it starts opening up the possibilities for what you can do, whether you're a hobbyist or you want to like change your careers or you want to add something to your skill set. Um, it's pretty crazy what you can do with just a couple of things and really good fundamentals and really great observational skills.
And this was a personal project, right? You said
Oh
this was
yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah,
this
this
is
was
just
just
you
like,
saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this thing," and then setting goals and getting to the end
mhm,
of it. I mean, I think it
yeah.
looks great.
Thanks. I mean, you know what was fun about this was I had done one before, but it was like 2 years before, and it was just like just one ape, and it was just like basically like waking up and going back to sleep. And I was like, oh, that was fun, but it took me a long time. And I waited like another year to get started. And then like that you wait a year and you're like, oh man, you almost lose that muscle memory. You know, it's the same
Yeah.
thing. Like if you play basketball forever and you get an injury, take a break and you go back, you feel clumsy. But I could feel like it coming back quicker. And I was starting to see like my decision making capabilities were a lot faster, like how many frames to stick in between two, or
Yeah.
even like your drawing capability with like hands. Um, and it was fun because the difference was I was not really posting a lot of stuff on Instagram when I did the first one. When I did the second one, I started posting Instagram stories every night. Like I would just like literally not even render anything, like just film the animation playing back or like show two drawings going back and forth. And the response I was getting from so many people, like not just like friends or people in the industry, but like people
Mhm.
who are animators I never met being like, oh, try doing this, or oh, make sure you post tomorrow night, like what you do, like don't stop. And it was like, it's
Oh,
crazy.
that's
Like I think
great.
the
Yeah.
first one I did took me like months because I was not pushing it. And this I think took like just, an hour here every night. I think it was like 2 weeks of like, okay, I'm gonna do some cleanup. All right, I'm gonna figure out I didn't know how to color. Like, and I found this new tool or this kind of secondary tool in Photoshop. And then yeah, that call and response that you get when you start making something and you post it regularly.
Mhm.
And then like even if you're not asking for help, people making suggestions, like that's the stuff that it was ages ago when I was in school. That's what you did when you're sitting next to 4 or 5 people animating. And I feel
Yeah.
like now, with everybody being remote and people being so isolated, that's the thing that I really do love about social media or things like this, or we can be live and you can hear,
Exactly. Yeah.
get into chats with people. Speaking of chats, like, is there anybody
Yeah.
watching this? Anybody
Yeah.
listening?
We apparently there's going to be a crowdfunding campaign set up to send you over to your hotel. Uh,
Awesome, great.
uh,
That would be great.
Kyle Hamrick is saying hi.
Hi, how's it going, Kyle? My Adobe Live brother.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody's loving what you're showing. There's a lot of motion design is hard to explain, comments, and
Hmm.
yeah, so I think everybody's just thrilled to have you talk about your work and to see what you're doing.
Well, what kind of stuff are you excited about, man? Like I saw your
Oh,
your drawing, like the streams. I was like, man, this is
well,
awesome. I got to go back through them. But like, what kind of stuff has got you like excited to get back to the table or back to your
well,
computer?
I'll,
And
I'll keep it brief, but I've done several live streams, and you just mentioned like getting that feeling like you're working with other people. That was the
hmm
only reason I got into live streaming was
yeah.
I'm going to be doing this anyway. I want to, have feedback. I want to talk to people while I'm working.
Yeah.
And that's really the main reason. But as far as, what I'm up to, well, maybe there'll be a spotlight later. I don't know. Uh, but yeah, I'm just kind of on the edge of like illustration and motion design. It's kind of a
hmm
mix. And that's another thing to what you were speaking to earlier, where it's all about, anything you can bring to that
hmm
motion design project. But yeah, but getting back to your spotlight, what
hmm
is this? What is this tomorrow today?
Oh man, like what? I feel like sometimes I was listening to you talk about like drawing and kind of getting into motion design, and it's amazing to me how many times if you're working in the industry, maybe you've touched a tool and maybe you had like a bad taste in your mouth from it or like you struggle with it.
Mhm.
Sometimes at the studio I'm working at Spillt, we're working on so many different things all the time. And you kind of just like you stick with what you know, right? You know what got you, through a hurdle or through a challenge. But sometimes you're like, I have no idea what else I can do. We are working on a project right now, and I was raving to people about, man, like, have you ever used text animators in After Effects? And a couple of people are like, yeah, I pulled up presets and I can't understand like what's inside the preset. Or like, I don't know when I would use it. Or there was sometimes a response like, oh, it always looks the same or it looks really stiff. And I was like, oh man, give me a night, give me a night. And I want to
Yeah.
show you like what you can do. Right. And I literally was like just playing around and I kept on reminding myself like, oh yeah, you could do this. And I was excited by like showing like in a course of like maybe 2 hours, and Kyle probably could do it in 45 minutes. Because he knows text animators so well. But I was
Mhm.
really surprised by like how far you could push text animators to get something that's really poppy and squash and
Yeah.
stretch and cartoony and really impactful. But the cool thing is, and I'm going to do this live, so I'll probably break it. So
Oh, no
like
worries.
just like,
No worries.
but like the thing that's so cool about it is that if you change it, you can fairly easily, and it won't work totally correctly because it's not going to be keyframed exactly to it. But like I just typed something and it just totally, like updated it, right? Like, and so many of my people on my team are like, oh, that's why
Yeah.
text animators are so cool because I
I,
could either make something super flexible or I can make it a toolkit I could give to customers. Um, but yeah, sometimes it's just like I wander shows because it's like you can still use all your principles, right? Like
mhm.
you may not know the text tool, but if you know how to do anticipation and to do follow through and how to use squash and stretch appropriately and not too much or too little,
Yeah.
those things that you have here and the stuff that you have in your heart that you've done a bunch of times, the tool is just like the conduit, right? Like you can get through that. But if you already know the real stuff, like the intangibles, I feel like it's great to show people like what's possible. If you just learn, text animators are great, I will say. They're really confusing because the naming conventions of them, like it takes me every time I use, I'm like, wait, what is triangle? What is square? What is ramp up, ramp down?
Yeah.
But like with anything, like with drawing, like the more you use it, you remember. But that stuff's just like
Yeah.
those are just tools you can learn.
And I'm completely guilty when I believe when the presets came out years ago, I was like, why would anybody use this? It's all the same. And it didn't take long, but I was like, oh, they're completely editable and
Yeah,
you can do all kinds of stuff with this. That's not why they're presets just to grab them out of the box.
exactly. Yeah. I mean,
There's
that I would say that's one of the coolest things about some of the more recent updates in After Effects is that they have gone through and see if I even have them in here. Sometimes I forget. But in effects and presets, they've added
oh
a ton of new presets that they've actually reached out. I'm almost sure Kyle actually made a couple. He could probably say, but if you go into animation presets, there's a lot of new text animators specifically,
yeah.
and you may never use them in a project, but I think that's what you're getting is like you can like apply them to text, and then you can kind of reverse engineer really easily. Like for the most part, most of this stuff is just. Thankfully, I've renamed these, but like it's just a bunch of
Yeah.
range selectors just doing one thing and then
Mhm.
offset the keyframes by 2 frames and do a different thing to it and then a different thing. And you're just stacking like effectors or range selectors on top of each other. And it's not that hard when you see it laid out that way. So I
Yeah.
don't know.
And
We
that's
showed a lot
actually
of
one of
crazy
the
stuff, but I want to say like even text animation, you can apply animation principles that you might learn in like cell animation or something.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one of the things I look at first now when there's an update. I'm like, are there new presets? What's
I love it. That's great. Yeah.
Kyle, speaking of Kyle, he did ask what are you excited to get your hands on? I think maybe that's in reference to some of the stuff from Max.
Yeah, I mean there was a ton of stuff. If you haven't watched the sneaks, like every year, that's always like the thing I stay up late for is like whenever they do their sneaks, like the second or third night. And it's sometimes it can be exciting, sometimes it can be frustrating because they show really cool stuff and then it
Yeah.
never gets implemented. Like I seem to remember like a particle system with like fire that was
Oh,
demoed
yeah.
that I'm like, this would be perfect in After Effects, and it
Mhm.
never showed up. But conversely, what Project Neo, I think was demoed a year ago, maybe
Yeah.
2 years ago at
Yeah.
Sneaks. And now it's basically like, hey, do you want to do 3D but in Illustrator? It's super easy and it's not scary. And I
Right.
think that that's kind of popping people's heads off their shoulders. I will say that the thing that I was the most excited about was at the keynote, they did it was like the Apple and one more thing. They showed off this thing called Project Concept. And I'm not going to talk about the two big capital letter word
Oh,
that
okay.
everybody gets
Yeah.
super scared about. But what I will say is I definitely want and need more tools for the beginning of the process, not necessarily the finishing of the process. And like I use Millinote quite a bit, and I think other people use Miro and a bunch of other things. But Project Concept is basically like a collaborative whiteboard that also, yes, does have AI tools that I don't want to like argue about. But to collaboratively work in a workspace that then speaks to all of my other tools like Photoshop or Illustrator or After Effects, but my whole team can work together and share ideas and remix them and target like comment on them and like kind of work together. I was really excited about the fact that maybe not even the app as it is right now, but the idea that Adobe is interested in playing in that space
Yeah.
because I do
Yeah.
think, I don't know how you feel, but I do think the world changed at our feet during COVID where everyone went remote. And some places are starting to come back, some places never will.
Mhm.
There are huge positives to it, but I do think, and maybe this is because I'm older and I did get that wonderful experience of sitting next to 7 or 8 other people that are way better than me and how much I learned and got from going to lunch or seeing them draw for half an hour. That turbo boosted my career and opened up ideas I never would have ever thought of by myself. A tool like that or the interest from Adobe for a tool like that, I feel like is going to help branch some of the stuff that I get worried about for creatives in the future, where it's all remote, sitting in a room like
Yeah.
this by
Yeah.
themselves for 20 years. So for me, that was the most exciting thing. It's like, cool, let's start getting that in people's hands and play with it and break it and make it better.
Yeah, any tools like that that helps development or collaboration between people, like the
Mhm.
Frame.io stuff that's
Yeah.
pretty wild now is any of that. I applaud it and I want to see more of it. You know,
Hmm.
the easier it is to get started on something, the better the end results will be, I always think.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you a tool I wish we had, if anybody's
Let's go.
listening. That
What?
we were joking about Adobe Bridge. Like I definitely like I use and abuse Bridge quite a bit. Like I love it. Like I actually like, oh my gosh, like I do so much referencing of like I find stuff on Behance or somewhere else, and I'm constantly like cataloging things. But I don't know if anybody else ever does this. What's great about it is like, let's say, let me think a quick way to do this. I'm always grabbing stuff, and I could go into like my folder that's just for whatever it is, like type, right? And like go into it. But if there was something about a specific kind of type that I wanted, I have I've been keyframing or keywording like crazy, right? So I have all these different I have like, oh, is it an animation, photoreal, whatever for projects. But I have these styles, right? So if I ever want to find something, let's see something that I know I'll actually get before I do it. Um, Something with textured timing. I know I'll get this. I can like literally like just go to my reference folder, right? I can go up to, let's see, yeah, reference, and I can type in textured timing. And like within seconds, I can actually get something because I've tagged all this stuff, right? And I
Mhm.
have this great, I don't know how well you can see this, but there's this great example of texture timing is like the M is moving up really slow, the O doesn't move at all, and then when it animates, it pops. So you
Mhm.
have like two different styles of timing, something smooth and something really poppy, and the same thing. Um, what I would love, and if anybody's listened to me, is like, here's a world where I would love AI. If Adobe Bridge had an AI enabled tool, feature, website, something that I could give it a list of keywords or things that I wanted to actually be categorized. And it just spent a day going through all of my files that I have everywhere on my computer and just auto tagging all that.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I, I,
Yeah.
I would be very stoked to be able, or whatever it thinks, right? Like if it did it by color palettes or if it did it
Right.
by, artists,
Yeah.
like
More than one, actually.
categories.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It'd be
Yeah.
great because it does, like we are under the gun. We are under a lot of pressure to work really fast in pretty much every industry, but I definitely know motion design. But
Mhm.
developing like your voice and your vision and your obsessions, part of it comes from every day finding more things and finding what you
Yeah.
like about them and categorizing them and calling them up and mixing and matching them and then adding your stuff on top and then sharing it with your team and see if your team digs it or if they don't, right? Like that's we use this is what I'm excited about using, project concept for eventually one day, but like we do this all the time where we're constantly, pulling stuff, pulling references,
Yeah.
trying to find ways to kind of like get excited about things. So
Mhm.
yeah, more help, Adobe, in
All
those
right, you
kinds of
heard
things.
it,
So
Adobe. Get to it. It'll
gauntlet's
probably be
been
in the
thrown.
it'll be in the next release. We'll see.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're about out of time, but I want to give you a chance to. I have a question. This is the
Yeah, yeah.
advice. Like, hey, what do you got? Um, one, I wanted to get this in. Do you have any tips for managing creatives?
Hmm.
I know that's a much longer conversation, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a whiteboard right here that, and this is more for like if you have a team full of people. One of the things I love to do is like almost keep and you can physically ask people this, or you can kind of like maintain it yourself. I love to do like a red, yellow, green with all of my artists to understand like where are they at emotionally, where are they at artistically, where are they at career wise, and like have a constant conversation with people that like you're not just like a unit shifter getting an assignment, getting it out as fast as possible and getting assigned the next thing. Like I really like to know like what are your career goals? Like what do you dig? What are you obsessed about? Like what are you doing outside of work? And is there any way that I can create an opportunity or find a job that lets you flex that? Like maybe you love to bake cookies. Maybe I can find a job where we're doing a holiday cooking special, and
mhm.
now you're an illustrator, but you're illustrating a thing you love, and you have way more personal interest and knowledge.
Yeah,
But like
exactly.
knowing that about people takes work, and it changes over time, right? Like you can't just like learn it and then assume it, and then for the next 3 years, like work against that or work towards that.
Hmm.
And I don't know how to like say that in like a like simple thing other than like artists are people. And the best artists are the ones who use everything they have as a person to feel like they're adding that to the conversation. So maybe that's it.
Yeah,
Maybe the
yeah,
shortest thing is like make room in conversations for everyone, not even just
yeah.
artists. If you work on a team, like man, sometimes the greatest creative ideas come from a producer,
Hmm.
and it takes a lot of like humility to be like, I never would have thought of that, and
Yeah, I
and
think
use
that's
that and reward the person for it. Like that. That's it's hard to do sometimes.
yeah, that's a great way to sum that up. I know we are almost out of time, but I wanted to give you a second. There was something you said you wanted to share with
Oh my
everybody?
gosh. Yeah. You might have heard me talk about inspiration. I showed you my like Adobe Bridge and like how I'm doing stuff
Yep.
all the time.
Yep.
When I found out I was doing this, I've been posting inspiration a lot of different places, like on LinkedIn. And obviously, if you ever see me on Twitter, I'm sharing more stuff than one person probably should. But I decided to do the thing that everybody's doing right now. But I decided to start an email newsletter, mostly because then I can put everything into one place and like not worry about social media, like likes and
Mhm.
reshares. And like, I just want to have a place where I put stuff. And if people are interested, it's free. It's obviously I'm not going to charge for like
Okay.
finding cool like
So
stuff I dig.
we
But
have
yeah, it's keysandcurves.substack.com. There's a million things you could use for it, but if I'm calling
there
it
you
keys
go.
and curves, and if you go to keysandcurves.substack.com, which we can add the link to, so I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right now, once a week, I'm just signing if it's Wednesday, sign if it's Friday. But I'm gonna post the stuff I dig here. And the stuff that I find. Sometimes it might be I wrote down like maybe it's top 10 list, maybe
Yeah.
it's finding an artist that I
That
dig.
I hate to
Um,
cut you off, Ryan, but I think we're about out of time. Guys,
yeah,
go
yeah.
follow the Substack. We'll try to get you a link. Ryan, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining us, and stick around. We have Ask a Designer coming up next. Bye, everybody.
Sweet. Thanks so much.